Wow, I can't believe we're almost halfway through, and we already learned and unpacked a lot already today. Now we know where we are standing with climate change. Now for the Clean Energy Panel, hosted by Anthony Kinslow of Gemini Energy Solutions.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Welcome, everybody. Excited today to have myself and two of my friends and colleagues on the call today. We can bring them up.
Hello.
Jada Sherman and Clarence. I want you both to introduce yourselves properly because I want the audience to know excuse me, I should have said your full name, Clarence Edwards. I want the audience to know all the things that you have done, what you're working on now. So I myself would not be able to do that justice. But before, I want to set the stage for what the audience is going to be listening to today and hopefully provide some framing for the discussion that we're going to have. So what we're going to be focusing on is clean technology, clean energy and its technology, policy that is going to enable the implementation of that, and how to get that clean technology into communities. So community implementation. And you'll see very shortly where each of these two individuals match up with that. And then I will end with my introduction and jump into discussion and questions. So let's start with you, Jada.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you all virtually. My name is, as Anthony mentioned, Jada Sherman. I'm a recent graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University, Aggie Pride.
Aggie Pride.
I have a bachelor's in science and environmental studies and a minor in political science. So I guess a little bit about me, I guess you could say that my passions are deeply rooted in advancing racial and social justice. I think that's all we're here having this discussion. I've had an array of internships from working with the Environmental Defense Fund as an agricultural sustainability intern, working with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation as an emerging leader. So looking at some of that policy and how we can use that to reform, frontline communities through political change. But also working with the Department of Energy as a Mickey Leland Energy Fellow. And then now with my current role, I'm working in an organization known as Solar United Neighbors. So I'll go a little to about that because that was sort of my introduction into clean energy and solar. Overall, I serve as the Energy Equity and Inclusion Associate at Sun. So essentially the work that I do is support our state teams in deploying low to moderate solar pilot projects. And so looking how we can, make solar more affordable and accessible to people who look like us and who may come from low to moderate income backgrounds. So I'm really excited to be a part of this conversation. Thank you so much. And I'll pass it on over to Clarence.
Hi, thank you very much. My name is Clarence Edwards. I'm the Legislative Director for Sustainable Energy and Environment for an organization called the Friends Committee on National Legislation, FCNL. It comes out of the Quaker community, and the organization has been around for roughly 50 to 60 years. We have a long-standing interest in social justice and also in protecting the environment. So in my job, what I do is I lobby the Congress for clean energy policies that will promote clean energy, advance environmental justice, and really lay the groundwork for building a sustainable low carbon economy that has opportunity for everyone. I've been working on climate issues for the past 2 years with FCNL. I'll point out that we've had a major victory in the past month or so with the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, and I'm sure we'll get into that. So we're very pleased with that. Just to give you a little background about myself, I've been a strategist and advocate in Washington, D.C. for the past 28 plus years. I've worked for foreign governments, including most recently the government of Australia, building relationships in the global development community for that country. I've lobbied on global development issues for Bono and the One campaign, and for the been an advocate for the Gates Foundation. I've worked on Capitol Hill, and I've also worked in the U.S. government as a political appointee for the Clinton administration, and also in congressional affairs for the Department of Energy. And I'm excited for this conversation today.
As y'all can see, we got some heavy hitters here. Myself, I am Dr. Anthony Kinsel II, also a graduate of North Carolina Agricultural and Technical State University. I went on afterwards and did my bachelor's there in civil engineering. Went on after that to do my master's and PhD in energy efficiency analytics at Stanford University. I hold 3 hats right now. I am a lecturer at Stanford University, where I teach 2 courses that focus on the clean energy transition and ensuring racial equity in that transition. I consult for a nonprofit around equity and commercialization, and that focuses on financing the clean energy and making sure that that solutions are financially accessible to everyone, especially those who look like us. And lastly, my company, which I started in 2016, Gemini Energy Solutions, which focuses on transforming the small commercial building sector and through energy audits. For those new to the audience, new to this space, an energy audit is an analysis and both a physical and a financial analysis of the equipment in a building, lights, your kitchen equipment, your HVAC units, etc. And it looks to say, hey, how can you save energy, save money by replacing this equipment with more energy efficient technology, more clean technology. And what drives that is that before you can do solar, before you can do any other clean technology, you need to understand the financial background of that, and also you need to understand what technologies could work for your building. And so that's what we're doing at Gemini. And one of the main things that we're striving for is to ensure that the demographics of that energy audit space, which is today typically middle-aged white men, starts to look younger and more diverse. So that's the work that we're trying to do. With that, I think it's really important to start a foundation, right? So I want to go around for all of us to talk about a clean energy technology that you are thinking about, have worked with, etc. Clarence, we'll go with you first.
Well, really, the technology that we've been thinking about a lot at FCNL is it's not really a particular technology, but we've really put our support behind efforts to sort of deploy and make more available, as we've already mentioned, solar technology, wind technology, and those clean energy technologies that can displace fossil fuels, and supporting production tax credits, investment tax credits that will help with energy efficiency, any technologies, any low carbon technologies that can help us to really mitigate and push back against climate change and really reduce our dependence on oil and gas. So that's a key technology. You know, if I had to pick one particular technology that I think is really important going forward, I would think about battery technologies and the ability to really invest in battery technologies that will allow the country and the renewable energy industry to really have a firm basis of power where you can deploy and further expand wind projects and solar projects. That's really fundamental. So I'll just leave it there in terms of the technologies that we're supporting. But really, in a nutshell, it's any technology that can help us to move further away from fossil fuels, build out a sustainable low carbon economy.
Yeah.
Yeah, so much like Clarence said, I work with an organization known as Solar United Neighbors. So it's in the name. We primarily focus on solar, and looking to see how we can use solar as a means to support frontline communities, and also looking at it through like the community solar aspect, which if you're not familiar with that, that is essentially having maybe an establishment that has a solar array, which the local community is able to benefit from it by buying in on that solar and getting a discount on their utility bill because they've invested in that solar through another owner. But yeah, like I said, mostly focusing on solar and how we can expand our efforts to solar for low to moderate income communities, to make sure that it's accessible to people. I think that's the biggest thing that we have right now is just with these new technologies like EV, like battery storage, we don't really see people who identify as, Black or brown or low income have, access to these renewable technologies. So really focusing on how we can amplify the grid to make sure that we're all, getting the best guest usage out of our energy system, and making sure that we're sort of shying away from that extractive fossil fuel industry.
No, Jada, I want to add on to that just from the standpoint of how you separated Black and brown and or low income, right? And what's interesting is people often want to combine that, right? They want to, when you say Black and brown, they think low income. And the realities are, even in our middle income, high income Black and brown communities, we are lacking behind in clean energy technology, right? This isn't a solely income-based problem. There is a racial component to this that the industry often likes to gloss over, or actually often don't even realize they're doing that, right? For me, I think about geothermal a lot. I have never once used geothermal in a project, but it seems like such a great technology. And for those new to this space, when we talk about clean energy, right, there's a lot of news out there around, clean or green, clean gas or clean coal, right? Those are not clean energy technologies. Okay?
Renewable gas.
Yes, renewable gas. This is the same thing that the cigarette companies did all those years ago, where they would talk about which doctors recommend which cigarette, and that used to be a thing. And the same thing is going on with fossil fuels. Clean energy is energy that when it is generating energy, it is not producing carbon emissions, right? Natural gas, petroleum, oil, coal. Am I missing anything? Like, these all produce
Nuclear.
greenhouse gas emissions, right? And for me, geothermal, there's countries like like Iceland, which almost 90% of their energy is from geothermal.
Yeah.
And it's an amazing experience to go see these plants there, but they are 100% renewable. Another country, Costa Rica, 100% renewable. So there's countries out there who are already doing this. So when people claim that we can't do it, we have examples of countries who have done it. And most countries are a lot further along than we are. Most European countries are further along than we are, right? And so Australia is further along than we are. So we really, as Americans, have a lot to catch up with. And part of doing that, having that catch up, is including us. Clarence, I'm gonna give you the floor a little bit.
It's I love the point you're making, because I often say to people that this clean energy revolution, and it is a revolution in renewable energy and building a low carbon economy, it is akin to the Industrial Revolution. And we as a community have to be sure that we're not left out of this revolution. I also work on environmental justice issues, and environmental justice, there are a lot of different components to it. There's part of it that might be backward looking and trying to address the harms that have happened to frontline and fence line communities for going on about 100 years or so, and addressing that legacy. There's another part of it, though, in my mind, in climate justice, and that involves making sure that, and Anthony touched upon this, but making sure, both of you have touched upon this already, but making sure that Black and brown communities are not just seen as, oh, here, let's take care of this legacy from the past, but also making sure that we get this community's fair share of the resources and of the opportunities to build wealth, intergenerational wealth going forward, building businesses. It's about making sure that we are fully integrated into a clean energy economy. This is the biggest opportunity in terms of, let's just be frank, this is the biggest money making opportunity. The renewable energy revolution is the biggest money making opportunity in our lifetimes. It is going to be huge. We cannot allow our communities to be left out of this revolution.
Yeah, and Clarence, I love how you said, this is an economic opportunity, but also if we're going to create these businesses, we also have to look at it from an educational standpoint. I graduated from HBCU. I love my HBCU, but when we're talking about how are we integrating clean energy into the classroom, and not only from a collegiate level, but also from a K through 12 level, like we have to start being a part of those conversations and going to these school boards and having these discussions about what does a clean energy future look like, and that means preparing people to be in the workforce. So I think that that's really one of the biggest components as well. And like you said, this is a money making opportunity. Like adopting solar, adopting renewables can save millions. Like it can literally advance your socioeconomic status. And I think that a lot of times, we see the upfront cost of adopting renewable technologies like EVs, like solar, and sometimes we don't think that it's for us. But it is, and there are a lot of awesome programs out there that have made it more accessible. Even with the passing of the IRA, has made it more successful, especially for community-based organizations to adopt solar into their local communities, especially if they're placed in frontline communities, as you mentioned before. It at least gives the notion of like, oh wow, this is accessible. I have it right in my neighborhood. I see it, and I think that like that's the biggest thing. Is like, how can we deploy these projects in a way that is intentional and that is influencing the lives not only through an economic level but also on the healthcare side. I mean, we can get into that too, but that's just
Exactly.
it's a very it's an umbrella, I guess, theme. Just all these things sort of fall underneath it, but I think that like if we're going to really advance in climate justice and sustainability, we have to start having these conversations, and we have to prioritize the people that look like us. And that means that we have to go to those places and engage with those people and figure out what is it that they need so that we can make this happen.
Absolutely. If I could just build on that real quick, Anthony, I really like the point you make, Jada, about education, because it wasn't that long ago that people of color were told, the assumption was, Black and brown people don't care about the environment, or like the World Wildlife Fund, much respect to WWF, but like choosing a polar bear as your symbol of the climate crisis kind of removes it from the human impact. And for decades, Black and brown communities have been told that, it's not those people aren't interested or concerned about the environment because they have bigger challenges. Well, our bigger challenges are grounded in the environment, right? And so going back and starting, like you said, very early on in the process with educating young people about this is why this is important and it's integral to your life and it can have positive benefits for your health. I'm looking forward to future conversations around how addressing climate issues and energy challenges can reduce the health impacts that hit Black and brown community. And frankly, everyone, white people included. It's healthcare reform to do clean energy, to do the clean energy transition.
Absolutely.
It's healthcare reform. Whoa.
Love that.
I want to just quickly, two things. One, polls that have been done actually show that Black and brown folks care more about the climate and want to see more done than white Americans. So when we do the polls and we actually look at the data, it's the inverse of what people talk about. And so there's a lot of misinformation and assumptions, often around racial lines within the clean energy space, that is blocking effective implementation of policy. is blocking money flow from things like venture capitalists and other aspects where, oh, that serving that market isn't actually going to work, right? There's an assumption there. And so when we talk about clean energy, we talk about implementation, we have to talk about the institutional racism. We have to talk about from a historical and a current racial mindsets, prejudices, and to both Jada and Clara's point, Black and brown communities are hit first, worst, and longest. What that means is where they are situated geographically, flood zones, right? Hurricane alleys, near pollution plants. That means they are getting disproportionate levels of pollution from ground, water, and from soil, water, and air. That's first and worst. Longest is because the federal government is sending money slower in less amount to those communities. And this is backed by research. There's plenty of people with a PhD just focused on this kind of this discipline of federal aid to Black and brown communities, right? So we have to not only be aware of the external aspects that are fighting us from being in here, but also recognize the great wealth and health opportunities by moving into this space. And it doesn't have to be through, we talk about education, it doesn't have to be through college.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And listening to what you just said, Anthony, it made me think of Jackson, Mississippi, and the water situation down there is a perfect example of what you're talking about with first, worst, and longest. They've been putting up with water that looks like oolong tea for years, you know, and it hasn't been addressed. And you have a government system at the state, at the city, state, and federal level that has been complicit in. So I just wanted to highlight that because it's a perfect example of what you've just been talking about.
And I think historically is like when we think about the nature of redlining and we think about that.
Explain redlining for folks.
Yeah, so I'm going to get into that. So essentially redlining is back when they were sort of districting homes, was it like the 1950s? Maybe off of my time, around the 1950s. And essentially they placed Black and brown folks in areas where there wasn't a lot of tree canopy coverage. And so what that meant is that their homes were warmer than some of their white counterparts because they didn't have enough sufficient, coverage of trees within their homes, and also because they didn't have a lot access to, heating and cooling of their systems in their homes. They ultimately, experience higher levels of temperature within their community. So like when you go to places like Brooklyn, New York, or when you go to places where they're no more rural and you experience their higher levels of temperature because they're mostly covered in cement and there's not a lot of tree coverage, there's not a lot of plants, there isn't really access to sort of like I said, those renewable technologies. It causes people to use less energy efficient, items in their homes, like ACs that go in your window. But then what does that result in? Higher utility bills. And so I think one thing to note is that low income and Black and brown folks, we spend more in our utility bills than majority higher level income individuals. And that's because we don't have sufficient energy efficient products in our home. Our homes are not built to withstand not even just extreme temperatures, but also extreme heat, but also extreme colds. I mean, look at the situation in Texas. Was that about 2 years ago when literally these people were out of power for weeks because the grid was not stable enough for them to even power their homes and be warm and keep safe, and people died. And we can even talk about COVID-19 pandemic. There are studies that show that nearly 87,000 deaths were related to utility shutoffs because people were not able to afford to pay their utility bills. So it was either have a home to stay in or have your lights on. And so, a lot of people experience, different medical issues, and they may need to, store their medicines in a fridge or somewhere cool. And when you have that, access to energy missing, then you're not able to take care of yourself properly. And so, yeah, about 15% of deaths in 2022 were COVID related deaths occurred simply because there was not a moratorium on the utilities, and they were able to continue to charge people astronomical amounts of money to pay their utility bill when they weren't able to do that.
And I'll just say, to your point about green space, to add to the comprehensiveness of why you should care, having more green space in a community is a psychological and mental benefit as well, right? Like you want to reduce gun violence, add green space, right? Like all these things are interconnected, and you want to have your kids learn better in school, increase ventilation, fresh air. Because what happens is in our schools, in our communities, there's way too many kids per classroom. The HVAC units are old and run down. And so the carbon dioxide builds up in that classroom, causing people to be lethargic, harder to pay attention. I was able to show this in Stanford classrooms. We have a carbon dioxide reader right in the classroom. You can start seeing once it hits past this threshold, it's like, oh, we need to clear out of here, because this is actually hurting our awareness. This is hurting our ability to learn and engage. How many schools do you know have that in elementary school or middle school or high school? And we know that they have a higher percentage of students per classroom, and combined with the lack of energy efficiency, it all starts to build upon each other. Everything starts building upon each other. I want to switch gears a little bit, because both of y'all have now mentioned the Inflation Reduction Act, which is, by my count, roughly $370 billion that's going to be coming from the federal government, coming down over how long, Clarence? Over how many years?
Over about a decade.
So $370 billion.
Credits, the tax credits are extended. The production tax credits and investment tax credits extend for they go 5 and 5, but it's basically a 10-year window.
That's a lot of money. So I want Clarence, you to start off with kind of giving a high level of what this is, why does it matter, and then Jada, I want you to jump in afterwards to really kind of drive in terms of the community implementation and conversations you've been having around this.
So yeah, just as a quick overview of it, as Anthony said, the Inflation Reduction Act, the largest climate bill. I was at the White House for a celebration of the Inflation Reduction Act on Tuesday, and the president said it's the largest climate bill, not only in the U.S., but ever. I don't know about or anywhere globally. I'm sure that the president spoke accurately, but I know it's definitely the largest climate bill ever passed by the U.S. Congress. And it is truly, the word transformational tends to get overused, but this is truly a transformational piece of legislation. Of that $369 billion, what does it include? It includes, as I've mentioned, tax credits for energy efficiency to build out clean energy technologies, wind, solar, geothermal. There's money in there, depending on how you feel about nuclear, there's money in there to extend the life of nuclear plants, which is fairly important for getting to a clean energy economy. One of the most interesting things about the bill overall, I will say, is this. It's not just an energy bill. It is a bill it's really a piece of industrial policy. And why is that important? It's important because it's about jobs. It's about really fundamentally reframing the American economy and setting up a system where good paying jobs are a part of this build out. And it's about bringing jobs back to the U.S. in manufacturing. Another interesting part of the bill is tax credits for advanced manufacturing. And advanced manufacturing includes building clean technologies here in the U.S. Lastly, I'll say there's between $47 to $60 billion in the Inflation Reduction Act for environmental justice grants and for initiatives in environmental justice communities across the U.S. And that is money to help build out programs, civil society and NGOs, giving them the ability to reach into and work with the federal government to build out programs. Also funding at the EPA to help clean up communities that have been impacted both by oil and gas development, but also communities that have been divided in the past by a car-centric culture that built highways through a lot of Black and brown communities, from New Orleans and the Claiborne, the expressway down there to Claiborne, out to Portland, Oregon, and Lower Albina. So it's a very comprehensive bill with a lot of different entry points for people and organizations who are interested in being part of this low carbon revolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think one of my favorite things about it is the community solar aspect, which I touched on a little bit earlier. So essentially, community solar enables people who are interested in participating in solar but may not have sufficient roofing, or may not be owners of their home, or may not be able to access solar for financial reasons. It allows you to be able to apply those credits from the solar from a local array within your community, and use those to receive, benefits, I guess, reduction on your utility bill. But one of the great things about the IRA's passing is that it has, in the community solar aspect, it has direct pay, which essentially allows for those, organizations who are interested, or maybe local churches or community-based organizations, faith-based organizations who are interested in adopting solar, receive those tax benefits as soon as their system is put on top of their billing. So that means that the fundings can be implemented back into those local communities. And then another portion of that is that they automatically qualify for another 30% of the ITC, which I can't really go too much into, but that's another additional credit that can be used for savings. And so there's a lot of potential in, the IRA, and also from the community solar aspect. When we think about a lot of low to moderate income communities, and most of those are apartment homes, they're not homeowners. And so we want to make sure that they can still take advantage of, like we said, decarbonizing our current system and adopting solar, but also other renewable technologies. So I'm definitely excited for that as well.
That's a great, the direct pay, I think, is critical. I don't think most people listening here realize it, that last year, if a church wanted to put solar on their roof, they had to pay more than a private corporation. Just sit with that. Your community nonprofit, local nonprofit that's doing work and teaching your kids after school, they would have to pay more last year for solar than the local pizzeria, right? Like that was what was going on in the tax credit, because nonprofits don't have taxes, so they can't take advantage of a tax credit. Now with the direct pay, all of a sudden that opens up.
Yeah, that's when people talk about the environmental justice aspects of the bill, they tend to focus on the money, and it's very important, but also, and this is really interesting to me, as you just said, it's embedded throughout the opportunities, and direct pay is a great example of it. It's making these tax incentives and tax credits more widely available to a broader group of people. So it sounds like, it's like PTC and ITC. People are thinking corporations and so forth, and that's part of it. But it's also, what this bill has done is widen the playing field for marginalized communities, for small businesses, for minority businesses, across the gamut. So the direct pay, something that we lobby to be sure that is included in the bill, is really going to be another transformational aspect of it.
Absolutely. Jada, did you have something before I jump into?
No, go ahead.
Okay. I do want to just quickly add around the jobs in manufacturing to our conversation earlier about kind of equity and racial equity in particular. One thing that is often not discussed is Black folks are disproportionately incarcerated in this country, right? We're going to have an untold number of new jobs coming on the market, and money from the Inflation Reduction Act to pay for the training of those new jobs. So our brothers and sisters who have been incarcerated, is there an opportunity for them to be a part of that, right? What are the barriers that are being presented there? Right. And now, Clarence, if you could speak to it, great. I wasn't trying to put you on the spot.
No, I just wanted to add that in addition to what you mentioned, we also have demographic challenges with declining birth rates in the US and globally. So that's going to increase the opportunities job wise because we're going to have labor shortages basically, you know, starting now is going to a trend that's going to continue. So I just wanted to throw that in there too. So it creates a playing field where people who have been incarcerated and are coming out and are looking for these opportunities, if they're given a chance to find these opportunities, it can be really beneficial. But I didn't want to interrupt you.
And I think we need to talk a little bit about like the workforce development component, because there are a lot of great organizations who focus on, these new renewable technology careers and focus on workforce development. But I think that in a lot of the ones that I've sort of came across is that there's a bias in terms of who is eligible for these programs. Do you have a high school diploma? And like Anthony mentioned, there is a disproportionately amount of Black and brown folks who have been incarcerated. And so we have to look at those individuals like, are you eligible for these type of programs? So I think there has to be a sense of equity centered in those workforce developments and talking about like who's eligible, what does eligibility look like, and also how is the information being shared. I think that that's one of the those biggest things, especially now that we're in this virtual space. We're not used to just, you go to your neighbor, you see them all the time. We're all working across the globe. I mean, I've never met any of these people in person. And so now it's the opportunity of how we can use social media and use marketing to sort of talk about, and even like this platform, for instance, Green Summit, this is a great opportunity for us to talk about the opportunities in the workforce development. But I think that there needs to be a broader discussion, and I'm still learning about that in terms of how we can make sure, because just having the education and knowing and adopting solar isn't enough. Like we need more people in this space that look like us so that it can be familiar to, their kids and their kids' kids. I think that that's something that's super important as well.
You touched on it. Familiarity. It's not just about awareness. People know about solar now. That's not the issue. The issue is familiarity, right? Familiarity with technology that is, by all intents and purposes, new, right? This is new stuff for a lot of Americans. You can't expect someone who has never seen an induction stove to purchase one for their kitchen, right? If they why would they do that? That makes no sense. Even if they could afford to do so. And for those who aren't aware, an induction stove is an electric stove that is powered via magnets. So in other words, you put your pot on there and you turn it on and it starts heating more directly. It saves a lot of energy. But what's cool is you remove the pot and instantly put your hand on it. It's cool, right? That it just blows my mind, that technology.
I have friends at Rewiring America who are on Twitter, and they will go on ad nauseum about induction stoves, and it's great. But part of me also think there are a lot of people out there. I mean, I had to Google it. There are a lot of people out there that don't. I'm like, they don't quite know. And there are a lot of people in our communities who don't know that
or don't see the value in it, I think, too.
Or don't see the value. Exactly.
Because I know I watch a lot of home decor, home demo shows, and they're like, I want a gas stove, I want a gas stove. And I don't think that
people don't realize that gas stove is poisonous.
Yeah.
Like everybody who's listening right now, I want you to understand this. And I'm telling you this as someone who has a gas stove in my house only because the manufacturing delays has not allowed me to get an induction stovetop. But alas, gas stoves are poisoning your indoor environment. What is burning is not clean. That is chemicals. So when you talk about asthma in our communities, you think burning gas in the house is helping with that? It's not.
Right.
Exactly.
All right. I want to keep switching. We're going to keep pivoting. And I think all of us have said it a little bit, but I want to be very clear here. Why are you working in the clean energy sector?
I guess I'll go first. I think for me, it was something that was very niche. As an African American, I never really heard anybody talk about being in a clean energy space. I didn't really understand it. And so I seen an opportunity in that. And then once I started really understanding sort of how we were being affected by it, and then also like remembering my firsthand experiences of being a child, and our power would go out, and I would just think, maybe it's just the weather, and then it would be days, and then now I'm trying to heat up hot water on a gas stove and like things like that to really make me like see like, okay, this is real and this is really entrenched in our society and this can really make or break, someone's, socioeconomic status. I mean, like, and so I think that that's for me, it was just like this is a no-brainer. And also like I really want to be a part of that generation that really transformed our energy system and that also like elevated and uplifted the voices of people who look like me and really push toward, getting to a cleaner energy space because I think that it's immensely valuable from a healthcare perspective, from, an environmental perspective, from a social perspective. I think just overall, it was just an opportunity that for me I just couldn't pass up, and like I feel like I want to affect meaning and real impactful change for people that look like me, and so I saw an opportunity here.
Perfect. Nice. Clarence?
I mean, for me, it stems back to sitting in a meeting in Washington, D.C. back in 2017 and hearing a government official from Fiji talk about the existential threat posed by climate change to countries in the Pacific Islands and how some of them could possibly disappear. And I remember sitting at a meeting and thinking, what? And it was like, what is going, and I had heard about climate change and so forth, but I thought I really need to leverage myself into that space. I'm interested in working on clean energy, and I'm blessed to be able to do that over the past 2 years because, as I said at the beginning, this is our generation's industrial revolution. Everything, some people get bent out of shape when you say everything's tied to climate change. Everything is tied to this. Everything is tied to this. It is about replacing the built infrastructure of our entire planet. And there are going to be winners and losers in that. And I wanted to be a part of the process. I wanted to use my skills to help shape the message. And also, building on what Jada said, I wanted to make sure that my community was a part of this transition because it is an enormous opportunity to not only help people live a better life, but it's also an opportunity to do some really good work and to really help protect the environment. So to me, it's where every road leads to, and it's the most important issue of our time. And I wanted to play a role in that.
And I think one thing to hit too is like I know a lot of people care about the economy, so it's an opportunity to catapult like our socioeconomic status as Black and Brown people in America.
Yes.
And I think that that's an immense opportunity. And I feel like we talk about generational wealth and what that looks like and what that means, but like here is a perfect example of how we can sort of get to that.
Yeah. Somebody's going to create, a lot of people are going to create intergenerational wealth on the backs of this clean energy transition. We should make sure that our communities are at the table when that wealth is created.
That's the nice way of putting it. I say we should be first in line.
No, absolutely.
Absolutely.
I'm a diplomat, so I'm always trying to be equitable and everything. But I hear you. I won't turn down being first in line.
Okay, yeah. Nothing wrong with that.
I want to escort to the front of the line, doggone it. For me, it was I was a junior in high school when An Inconvenient Truth came out, and my parents both taught me like we expect you like. What are you going to do for others? How are you going to make an impact? And for me, I watched An Inconvenient Truth and I was like, well, I'm just going to have to save the world. That was my, 16, 17-year-old self being like that rational decision, right? Like, well, time to pull up, put up a shut up.
Put on the tape.
I have a job to do, people.
Yeah. Wait. Let's lower that thermostat. Come on. And when I got to A&T, I was participating in a lot of green stuff or planting trees, etc. And for me, there wasn't a racial component to this because for me, climate change was a threat to all humanity, right? Like it doesn't matter if you live in the continent of Africa, continent of Asia, like if you're on North and South America, everybody's in trouble, right? So we should all be able to get along, right? Like in my head, that's how it was. And being at A&T, I saw a bunch of Black people from all across the diaspora engaged in this clean energy stuff, right? Engaged in green, engaged in sustainability. And so for me, I was like, oh, we're good. We're moving. It's not like we're not moving fast enough, but we all got everybody in here. And then I got to Stanford. and I was the only Black person in the program. And then I go to I start going to these conferences, and I'm like one of a few Black people in hundreds, right? And it starts to become real clear to me that to accelerate our transition, because make no mistake, whenever you hear someone say 2050, they don't know the science. When you hear you say 2040, they're not up to date on the science, right? We have 2035 right now. And at our pace, it may drop to 2030, right? To make some significant movement in this thing. So the pace, you'll see these things, we're doing 3 times what we did 8 years ago. That's not enough. We need to be 30 times what we were 8 years ago. Just so everybody understands where we're at right now. We need to accelerate. And the best way to accelerate is to start including the people who care most about that.
Mm-hmm.
I'll give you a hint, right?
I'm glad you mentioned that though, Anthony, because it's like people hear these timelines and it's like we need to be moving on stuff now, and
Today.
we don't have time to be disenfranchising people and so forth. It's just like, just amen to what you said.
So I want to open up some questions, but before I do, I want to explain a few clean energy technologies just so people can leave with a few things. So geothermal, first off, is when you are taking the heat from the earth. So you're drilling down and utilizing the heat from the earth to use energy. Okay, so that's geothermal. There's also electric vehicle chargings or bi-directional vehicle charging. What that means is you can plug in your vehicle and charge it, or you could plug your vehicle into your house and use that as a battery for your house. That is a technology that is being utilized now. So if you buy an electric vehicle, in particular, right now on the market, I know the Nissan Leaf is doing that, and the new Ford F-150 is able to do that. Hopefully, and my understanding is that more and more car dealerships, more and more car manufacturers are making cars bi-directional enabled. What that means is you can charge your car, or you can use your car to charge your house. So this is huge when we talk about outages, right? The Nissan Leaf, my understanding, can run a house for 3 days. For Lightning, 5 days, right? Like that is significant. And so these are some technologies that I want people to be aware of. Most people already heard of wind power and solar, but these are some other things that are now coming forward. There's a lot of technologies that are allowing for homes to electrify their homes. You'll hear a lot of people talk about electrify everything. Well, how are we going to, who can afford that, right? And a lot of our homes need panel upgrades. Well, there are technologies that allow you to put two equipments on one circuit so that you don't have to get a whole new panel, which is thousands of dollars. So there's technologies and solutions out there to explore. I wish there was a central node for all this information that could direct people to, but definitely want to throw these things out here right now. And then let's open this up to questions, and then if we slow down on questions, we can get back into the conversation. Will be our new main source of renewable energy. Does anybody? I can speak to this, but I want to give you all a chance.
I think that because there are so many opportunities within renewable energy, like you have wind, you have geothermal, you have solar. I don't really think that there's going to be one that particularly stands out. I think that, different regions will use them for different reasons. I guess climate has one to do with that. Like if you live in a region that is mostly windy, mid, weather, I guess in terms of like weather, I think that you have opportunity to, use wind. I think if you live in a place where you're closer to the ocean, you have the opportunity to use that as well. Wind turbines. I think that it's just, I don't really think that there is an answer to that question. I think that there were a lot of different opportunities. I just think that finding one that works for you. But for me, I'm an advocate for solar. I think there's immense opportunity in that. So I'm going to be a little bit biased, but that's sort of my stance on that.
Yeah,
when you mentioned geothermal, I often think of the Pacific Northwest. The ability, what you said, Jay, is very true. It's like it'll be regional, it'll be more region specific going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And a professor out of Stanford University, Mark Jacobson, actually created a guide for all 50 states with the breakdown of solar, geothermal, hydro, wave, tidal, right? You can actually generate energy from tidal of the ocean, right? Solar, of course, both utility and rooftop, right? So that it's going to take a diverse a diversity of renewable energies, no matter what state you are in. It's just some states have more of abundance of other options, wind or geothermal or sun.
Right.
Next question.
Yeah.
Well, all three of us have different careers, I may add.
Yeah. I'll go first. I think for me, it's so crazy because similar to Anthony, I was in the 10th grade and I took an environmental science class and I learned about fracking. And I was like, wow. And if you don't know what fracking is, from my standpoint, essentially, a lot of major water companies like Dasani and like Deer Park, the ones that we love so much, they go to a lot of small towns and they essentially go to their natural water sources, and they are, I guess, what do you call it? Digging into the ground, using a sort of technology that essentially like shifts the tectonic plates underneath the earth, and so it causes a lot more earthquakes. It disrupts, some of the soil within there, and it exposes people to maybe harmful gases through their water system. And so for me, if an example of that would be like Flint water crisis, for example, where it creates more opportunities for for people to be exposed to lead within their waters and different chemicals. And so for me, that was like, okay, I need to save the world. Like that was sort of my aha moment. And then I went to Auntie, and Auntie is an agriculture school. And so like from my standpoint, initially going in, I'm thinking like, oh, I care about climate as it relates to agriculture. And sort of, greenhouse gases from agriculture, like one of the biggest emitters of greenhouse gases, in the world, production of food. And so that's sort of my lens of looking at it. And then eventually I was like, this is not really my steez. I liked it, but I wanted to sort of get into a gamut of different experiences. And I knew that there was value in policy. And so that's where that minor in policy comes from. And so through that, I was looking for like internships that were sort of policy related. And that's sort of how I came across the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation and becoming an emerging leader. And so beginning to have those conversations about how we can sort of use policy as a way to leverage, racial and social justice for communities. And then through that, sort of like still just trying to figure things out, going to be a Mickey Leland Energy Fellow and looking at sort of abandoned oil and gas wells. Looking at it from abandoned oil and gas wells in terms of that, and sort of I'm looking at it from like because oil and gas wells, the abandoned ones, are sort of how we traditionally used to support our fossil fuel industry. And so then looking at that in terms of like, how do we sort of look at these wells and create more environmental and friendly practices to sort of mend these wrongs that we did within the past. And so that was sort of my introduction into energy. And then from that, being a part of a clean energy campaign, and then through that, becoming a part of Sun. So like I've had a sort of like, I guess I've gone down all the paths and stopped at all the doors to figure it out. And so I'm here. But I think that like if you're rooted in change and you really want to, especially social justice from a social aspect, but also have a personal, I guess, like relationship. And I feel like we all sort of had our own firsthand experience of climate change. If you feel that, then I think that it doesn't really have to be some sort of particular route in which you go. You could be a model or a journalism student and be interested in climate. I don't think that it has to be particularly, you're in this field, because I think it affects all of us. So that's just my spiel. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with what you said, Jada, in terms of like, you don't have to have a particular background. It certainly helps with the science and so forth, but the climate, working on these issues, it's going to require people from all different walks. I've had conversations with people in the arts community about the role that artists can play in helping us to understand and process the changes that are happening to the natural world, and help us to understand the human relationship to the environment. My path to this really started with working on U.S. foreign policy early in my career. Then I got into advocacy around global development. And that helped me to learn more about the wider world, but also some of the challenges that developing countries face. And then, as I said, when I was working for the Australian government, I encountered the issue of sea level rise. And so I wormed my way toward climate. I've had stops working as a lobbyist on energy issues briefly, and then, as I said, working at the Department of Energy. But I think that wherever you're starting from, there is a pathway that you can find toward working on climate. And whatever your pathway is, it's going to be a legitimate pathway because it's going to be the pathway that you own and that you know best.
Yeah. To summarize, your age doesn't matter and your gift doesn't matter, right? Both are, you can make an impact.
No, absolutely. Everyone from every perspective has something to offer to this issue.
Yeah, it's all hands on deck, right? It's the
if
house is on fire, and we all need to grab something.
If this is a real climate crisis, no one's going to be checking your credentials at the door and saying, "Well, I don't know. You don't know anything."
Come on, bring your bags.
No, yeah, bring what you got.
Now, if you're good at just gossiping, I will use you.
But now to get the word out, that's important.
Yes, exactly. So being a little bit specific about job opportunities, right? I think plumbers, electricians, anyone in the contractor realm, that we essentially need to retrofit over 100 million buildings in 8 to 10 years. Right, like, which means no big deal. We just need to increase the job market by 10x.
My nephew's getting into steelworking because, and I said to him, I was like, I hope you stick with it because at the rate they're going to be building wind power and solar plates, I was like, I might get into steelworking myself.
Right.
Yeah. So anyone. Oh no, the donut hut is real. We're gonna get to that. Thank you. Put that question up there. One of the challenges that we have is how do we get to someone who's doing something, right? Like, you want to be a plumber. How do you get into that space, right? And I'll be honest when I say I don't have the pathway for people. Like, I don't have someone I can say call this number. And this is how, and they'll get you situated for being a plumber, right? Call this number and they'll get you situated to start training being an electrician, right? And we kind of need that. We need something to make it simple for people who want to get involved. And let's not get it twisted. Those are really good paying jobs. Like, they make more than I do. I own my own company. They make more than I do. So, like, let's not get it twisted. They make more than I do working at Stanford, consulting, and running my own company. Mind you, my company is just starting out.
I was only half joking about getting into steelwork, and I'm like, you hear the salaries. It's like, wait a second.
Yeah, no, and the better you are at it, the easier you start then become like a master electrician, and you're making hundreds of thousands of dollars signing documents and having everybody else do the work.
Right? And I think one thing to add is that this is important too for like a lot of small businesses. Like, if you're trying to elevate your small business, especially in frontline communities, this is how you do it. So that's just one thing to add as well.
But this is a time for people to get in touch with the unions. This is a time for people to get in touch with Small Business Association. And, we have a federal government now that is trying to facilitate. I mean, we're not all very accustomed to this in this era, but there is actually a federal government that is trying to be helpful to what we're talking about. And I know I work every day with the federal government. I'm like, I don't know, but like, the government is trying to meet what we're talking about, meet the demand. And so there are resources throughout the federal government, and it feels like it can be distant sometimes, but those resources are out there. And whether it's civil society groups, unions, or state and federal government, there are avenues to learn more about everything that we've been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's put the next question up there, but yeah, I'll double down. Google is probably going to be your best friend, and local union, these kind of things, small business things, etc. All right, good. The donut hole theory. Thank you. I was
I
excited
don't
for
know
this
this
question.
one.
All
Yeah.
right. So this is right in my wheelhouse.
Anthony
So
special here. Go for it.
all right. So the donut hole theory, my understanding is that it originated from the healthcare system. In fact, that use this term in the healthcare system as well. But in this case, in clean energy, what we're talking about is on one side, you have people whose income is low enough that they're eligible for weatherization assistance and other federal plans, right? Like to help with their energy efficiency, to help pay their bills. They have income low enough for that, right?
Mhm.
On the other hand, on the other side, you have folks who are wealthy enough, whose income are high enough where they can just buy anything they want in terms of energy efficiency, in terms of clean technology, right? But then you have the vast majority of Americans who are in the middle. And so it
I'm
makes
that person. I'm in the middle.
right? Who may not be, are not poor enough to be eligible for federal assistance, but sure ain't rich enough to be buying $20,000, $30,000 worth of stuff to electrify their whole home, right? So, or credit score isn't good enough, right? Like even if they wanted to do that, the credit score isn't good enough, right? So and so that is who's in the donut hole. Now, this is, by the way, was brought to the clean energy sector by Professor Tony Reams from University, newly minted tenure professor at the University of Michigan, who is now currently working at the Department of Energy, and is a good friend of us on this call. And I just got to say that there's been further research being looked into this because there's the donut hole from a theoretical standpoint, right? Who has enough, who fully fits in there, and who has income high enough where that money doesn't matter, 20, 30,000 doesn't matter, right? There's the theoretical level, but then there's the actual practical level, right? And that's when we start talking about credit card scores and things like that, where it's like practically they would like to do it, but they can't. And so more research is being understood of how big is that number? How many people, what percentage of Americans are fit in that donut hole? One of the solutions that the nonprofit that I consult for, Clean Energy Works, focuses on and has identified to try and address this donut hole theory is called inclusive utility investment programs. Now, the EPA has this on their website, inclusive utility investment programs. And the concept is very straightforward. The utility pays for the upgrades of the homes or the businesses, and they recover the payments from the reduction of the bill, right? So you get more energy efficient, you get a little solar on your roof, your bill drops down, say $200 per month, right? Well, they'll take 80% of that and use it to pay off the upgrades. What's really great about this is it is not tied to the individual. It is not a loan. It is tied to the meter. So that person can say, yeah, we want those upgrades, great. And then they have it. They're seeing a $20 reduction in their bill, and have all new stuff in their house, right?
Mm-hmm. So is it like a pay as you save program?
There it is. Pay as you save is the pay as you save program was the original was what inclusive utility investment is built upon. Mm-hmm. So many folks out here may be aware of pay as you save, and that's being utilized in something like 10 different states and utilities in those states, including California is utilizing it right now with water, and there's a major proceeding happening to discuss whether they utilize it for electricity so that Californians can access this for electricity. Roanoke, North Carolina, Roanoke Electric Cooperative has been utilizing pay-as-you-save in their communities. And Arkansas, Georgia Power has a program going. Minnesota was talking about implementing this. So this is Missouri, Ameren in Missouri. It has been implementing this and has seen amazing results in this past year in terms of people signing up. But it's really it's something to start to address this fundamental issue, which is today most solutions are, hey, we need to get clean energy, pay for it yourself, right? That is right now the general assumption is that every single American will have to pay for it themselves in order for us to reach our clean energy goals, and that's not realistic. And so inclusive
And
utility investments should do
I
that.
just want to touch on that just a little bit and talk a little
Yeah.
about my organization. So the work that we do, and like that's why I use the term low to moderate, because I think a lot of the people that we work with, they fall in that donut hole space where it's you don't fall below 80% area median income, but you're not above. But you don't fall below 100% AMI. So how do we get those folks to adopt solar, but also making sure that we're not creating any more burdens, with the adoption of solar? And so we have a lot of pilots that we're running to sort of support that. But I think the biggest thing is like, how do we sort of scale these pilots up? We've done 10 home, we've done 20 home pilots, but it's like, how do we make a product that if it has a loan attached to it, or if it's fully funded, who are the donors that we go to that access some systemic funding so that we can support these projects? Or then what are the who are the CDFIs that we reach out to and say, hey, we have, a community that wants to adopt solar, but we don't want a loan product that is more than 3%. We want them to have ownership into their home. And so I think that there's a lot of conversation around that and how we sort of, bridge the gap, close the donut hole, but, still continue to have those conversations.
Nice. Yeah. Next question. Let's keep it moving. I haven't been answered.
This is a controversial one, I think, because you mentioned Professor Mark Jacobs earlier, and he's come out with that study, that report in the past couple of weeks about how you can do 100% renewable energy. And I've seen a lot of pushback from, and one thing about the climate or in the environmental community is like people, as I've learned over the past couple of years, people have sides and people have people have their thing. And it's like, people are like, oh, that's not possible at all. And when you're new into the space or early into the space, it's kind of like, what's actually true? So my answer to this is, I don't know. So I defer to the more experienced people on this panel.
I think anything is possible. I think that we just have to make sure that we're fueling the workforce to meet this abundant challenge. I think that we have to, talk about the education of renewable. And I think we have to be realistic in our acts and what we're trying to do. But I do think that it's possible. I just think it's a matter of, are we willing to put the work in and address the things that need to be addressed to get there?
So there's a technical answer to this and there's a practical answer to this. So as the as the academic on the call, I'll go technical first, and then I'll go to practical. Technically, enough sun hits the Sahara Desert to power the whole globe.
Wow.
So technically, yes.
Think about that one all weekend.
Yeah, if we had these massive wires, right, coming, if we destroyed the whole ecosystem of Sahara Desert, mind you, we did this, but that is technically a solution, right? So yes, and that's just sun. That's not even talking about wind, right? So, and what's interesting is wind and solar often kind of support each other. Usually when sun is high, wind is low, and vice versa. So there's some nice things. You're going to need batteries. You're going to need lots and lots of batteries, right? But batteries are coming in different ways now. I already mentioned bidirectional vehicles. How many school buses and regular buses do we have in this country, right? Every single one of those could be used as a battery when they're not running people. So school buses across the country, as soon as they drop those kids off, could go and plug into the grid and be a battery at night, right? Like that, these are real solutions that the federal government is also putting money behind, right? And so these aren't like pipe dreams. These are things that are actually being implemented today. On a practical level, the major challenge is not whether we can do it, it's all the barriers of an existing infrastructure preventing us from doing it, right? make no mistake, fossil fuel industry is spending millions, hundreds of millions of dollars to block things, to make it harder to transition, to make it more complicated, to make it more messy. And it's not just transition to energy, but also who's working. To Jada's point about workforce, people working in the fossil fuel industry, are they just going to be out on their butts without no money for their families, or are they going to be able to transition to this clean energy space? All these there's solutions out there for all this, and they're not super complicated, but there's hundreds of millions going in regularly to try and make it muddier than it is. So can we afford to get rid of traditional energy sources? Absolutely. In fact, it would save us money, make all of us healthier, and quite frankly, will be saving a lot of our lives, especially if we do it sooner rather than later. Last question.
I will say that one of the ways that we can change is that with most countries further along than us, and I don't know whether that's entirely, Europe is going to be further along than the US, but it took Russia's war and invasion of Ukraine to really concentrate minds there. They probably will be further along than us. China builds more renewable. I just saw the statistics earlier this week, but China basically is dominant in renewable energy, clean technologies, building them and deploying. And so they're doing a lot as well. The ways that we can change that was we've really started with the Inflation Reduction Act. I mean, that bill is a real start to really getting serious about pushing the energy transition along. So it's going to take policy, but not just policy at the federal level, state policies. And frankly, we live in a market economy, and it's going to take the private sector to really grab what has been done in the IRA, as we've been talking about, and run with it and really push this transition forward.
And I believe I said a lot of countries are further along than us, but I can make most countries are further along to us. Actually, all countries are further along to us in terms of carbon intensity per person. I think we per person produce the most carbon emissions in the world, right? China produces as a country more greenhouse gas emissions than we do. But America per individual, we have the largest impact.
Your average American uses more electricity, for example, more power with their refrigerator than the average Kenyan family uses in six months or so. I mean, the figures are mind-boggling in terms of how much. I probably used more energy just setting up to do this call than a lot of people in parts of sub-Saharan Africa or Latin America or Asia use in an entire day. So yeah.
But I think also, like, on the flip side of that, like, they're deeply devastated in their advancement to energy just in general. Like, a lot of those people don't even have access to like a grid at all. So that's another challenge as well. But I think for me, policy is definitely going to be one of those true political reform. And I think ensuring that there are no shady deals going on. I think that that's one of the biggest things, because we have like the Inflation Reduction Act being passed, but then on the side there may be other, and who shall not be named, has tried to get other deals passed that support the fossil fuel industry, that support the utility. And so we have to make sure that those things aren't getting passed through our legislature, because to me it's like we take 10 steps forward only to go 20 steps back. That's my biggest thing.
And just to reiterate that, I'll name him Senator Joe Manchin. You got to make sure that you got to make sure that he stays on a straight and narrow. And then these state legislatures, particularly when it comes to environmental justice, it can flow down from the federal government, but you have to make sure that your local you have to make sure that your local justices and judges and the good old boy network that exists in this country doesn't stop that money from getting to places like Jackson or to Cancer Alley or to other communities around the country.
I encourage y'all to look up the word Cancer Alley and
Yes.
have your mind blown.
Yes, please.
All right, we're about at time, and I want to close out But I guess I'll close out with this. There is a lot of work to be done. Every single person listening can have an impact. So you have a responsibility to do and make an impact. How we're doing the work we're doing, what is unique to who we are and what in our life experiences. And I encourage you to explore what you've experienced in your life, what gives you a lot of joy, and focus on that to come into this clean energy space, right? Because it is taxing. I think all three of us can agree that it is very emotionally and mentally taxing to be in this space, because we understand what is coming, right? We understand the science and what does that mean. All of you listening are aware of the fires and the droughts and the flooding that is occurring, and that's only going to increase. The levels of hurricanes only going to increase, right?
The levels of pandemics.
The level of pandemics
Mhm.
only going to
Mhm.
increase, right? And so knowing this and then constantly having to fight people to try and save this world, not even the world, the people on this world, right? It is taxing. And so the way to get through that is to do it in a way that brings you joy and that fits with who you are and what you want to do.
Amen. You'd be amazed at how difficult it is to get people to protect the planet, the only planet. You'd be surprised. So don't hesitate. Jump in and join us, because we need your
Yeah.
help.
And I think one thing to mention is like these are not scare tactics, because I think a lot of people think that people who are pro climate are like trying to scare you into being an advocate or being a part of it. I think, like Clarence mentioned, this is your world, like this is your home, and I'm sure you all want children or have children or just have families that you want to sort of be able to exceed life after you. And I think that if you value, having clean water, having fresh air, being healthy, and being in an ecosystem that, brings you joy, then now is the time to get a part of these conversations and support the people in the communities around you.
Yeah, and build a community about this, right? And reach out. We'll be part of your community.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Thank you all.
Thank you, Anthony. Thank you, Jada.
Thank you. You made it.
Rookie mistakes. You feel like I haven't been running an entire environmental summit all day. I want to thank you, Anthony, Jada, and Clarence. This was such an amazing, informal panel. I learned so much throughout this session. To you at home, I hope you were able to get something out of it, because I feel like this has been such an important conversation. We have one more session for today that's going to begin at 4:10, and we're going to have some government agencies really come on and talk about what they're doing and really dig into some of these policies that was discussed here in this session. If you guys want to talk, we have a breakout session right after this. If you're in the STEM City Metaverse, you should see a button right on the left-hand side of your screen. So go ahead, click there, and be back here at 4:10, and we'll continue the conversation with our last session of the day. You guys take care. I'll see you soon.